Welcome to Gardening with Calyx. I am Thelma. We are going to return to one of the favorite topics here in the garden, orchids. Regular viewers would remember that we did a video about 3 months ago showing you how we mount various varieties of orchids onto tree fern bark. I decided to do an update today because within 2 or 3 weeks of doing that demo, we had an invasion of birds that decided to help themselves to the coconut coir fiber that was used on the mounds to retain the moisture around the roots. Now, that had various effects on the growth of the orchids, and I'd like to share that with you, as well as what you can do if you had a similar attack. So please keep watching. Let's enter our orchid gallery. And what are you seeing here? Interesting collection of plants. We're looking at those that were mounted on tree fern slabs a little less than 3 months ago. And looking at this one closely first, you can see the new growth, the lighter green roots. But what is also noticeable, you could see that there's very little coir fiber left, and that's part of the reason I'm doing this update, because within 2 weeks of hanging these orchids in the gallery, the birds discovered a very easy and accessible and free source of housing material, and they set about removing as much of the coconut coir fiber that they could. In this case, they didn't get to the majority of the fiber that's at the bottom, very tightly clasped by the cable ties, but the section that was above is totally gone. And here we have exposed roots. You could also see the additional roots, the new growth in the last 10 weeks. Oh, this one really, the birds really went to town on this particular slab, leaving not one trace of the coconut fiber. That definitely needs some protection from the drying, and the other small dendrobium likewise has been left hanging, fully exposed for the last 10 weeks or so. If I look closely, I'm not seeing any new growth. The leaf, there's one remaining leaf, which tells me the plant, there is hope for rescue. And here again, there's no evidence of root growth. And the Phalaenopsis that was mounted upside down on the slab, I could see young new growth at the tip. You could also see that there's very little of the coconut coir fiber left. So it did not escape the bird attack, but it didn't seem to have slowed it down, because in the 10 or 12 weeks since we mounted, we were rewarded by this lovely spike. It started opening up already, and it's safe to say this orchid is happy in this location, so give thanks. So now that I've showed you the results of the attack by the birds, you must be wondering now, what are we going to do about it? Well, it's easier to decide if I place the mounds next to each other. So that's what I'm going to do. Here are the 7 mounts on the table in front of me, and as you would have seen in the gallery, there's varying levels of adverse impact. There are some plants that seem not to be too bothered, but what I had to do immediately on noticing that the padding material was removed, I increase the frequency of misting. Rather than misting every 2 days or so, I try to do a daily misting in order to provide the roots with the moisture that is required. Now, the smaller the plants, these tiny dendrobiums here with absolutely no padding material, they did not do so well, whereas the phals and some of the larger dendrobiums survived the impact of no padding material. Let's take a look at each mount so we can determine the best course of action. Looking at these two dendrobiums, these tiny ones, they're actually, as I mentioned before, the kikis that I took off of a mature plant, kikis being the offshoots halfway up the stem of the dendrobiums. And I could see that there is a little bud coming out here. Likewise, looking, yeah, so there's hope for these. This Vanda, when we mounted it, these roots were nice and alive. Remember, if you saw the video, we did trim and leave healthy roots. But what I'm really pleased to see is that despite the absence of the coir fiber, these are new roots. There are 4 lovely, very nice new fleshy roots. So she's going to survive, but I think I will also, but I'll prune away these roots that perished. So these 3, which I think are the worst of the lot, I'm going to help them along by giving them a pouch filled with moist coir dust, not the fiber, but the dust. Next, the Phalaenopsis. Now, all of these roots are tightly anchored onto the slab, so which means that this plant is really well established. I'll continue the misting so that they don't dry out. So she's good to go. This particular mount retained quite a bit of the coir fiber. Looking closely into the corner, the young roots coming out. I would say this one needs no further attention. It is a slow grower, it already is heading in the right direction, and it still has some padding material. Likewise, because of the habit of growth, this variety of dendrobium just lays flat against the slab. Young roots are coming out, and they will come out in all directions, so it's going to be hard to put any protective covering in this area. The mount is very fibrous, so here again the solution is to resume the frequent misting. This guy, I really like how it grows. Has a lot of new roots, and here's a shoot coming out. So this one too, I think, withstood the removal of the fiber with very little impact. So I think it can just go back in the gallery and fend for itself. What do you think? I'm going to be creating small pouches using a material that's readily available to me, and that's shade cloth. So just a quick demo, one idea how you can create something relatively simple using a few materials that will serve the purpose of retaining the moisture around the roots so that they will not dry out and will continue to grow. And as I mentioned before, any porous material can work depending on what you have. We have shade cloth, and what I have done is size them for the respective mounts. I did one beforehand so you can see what the end result, what we're aiming for. For the content of the pouches, instead of the longer coconut fibers, which the birds took for their nest, I'll use the finer coconut fibers, which we call coir dust. And the simple method we're using is just to affix the segment in such a way that the coir dust does not fall out the bottom or the sides. So we have done holes. Let me use a better pointer where you can see. These 2 holes will be securing this side, and we have equivalent holes on this side. I've already made holes in the shade cloth to correspond to the holes in the mount. I'll position the segment to cover only the roots and not the leaves. So let me begin the process, and I'll speed it up to save time. These are the finished products. This would be considered a bird protection pouch, and it really neatly holds the coir. Be careful not to keep it too moist. So the roots are going to emerge, and they're likely to go in all directions, up on the slab as well as down. And as soon as you see any roots poking through, it would be time to remove the pouch, because this is not a long-term construct. This really is just to keep the roots moist long enough for them to expand on the entire slab and to make sure that they're safe from the birds. And speaking of birds, while we were filming, this little bird stopped by, probably looking for material to build his or her nest. Can you believe it? So now that we finished the hard work, that is assessing the mounts and putting the protective covering over those that needed the protection. And just to remind you, the purpose of the protection is to keep the humidity as high as possible around the rooting area so that we can encourage rooting. Now, in the event that the materials are removed, then you will be required to do more frequent misting. So in fact, the orchids really absolutely don't need the protective covering as long as you're prepared to do the frequent misting. So one advice I'd give to anybody who's hanging their mounts outdoors where there are birds and other creatures, try to use a material that they are not going to be interested in using for their own purpose. So, now that we've come to the end of this video, I trust that you liked the content, and if you did, please give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and for those of you who may not have subscribed as yet, we're encouraging you to do so. That way you're not going to miss any of the updates that we do on this video, as well as on several other topics that we're monitoring. But before I take my final goodbye, let me show you how good the new pouches look in the orchid gallery. So until the next video, I am Thelma in the Calyx Garden saying thanks for watching. You take care. Bye-bye.